I'll be chairing. My name is Senha. We have Yaman, Tate, Mabruk, and Chakrit. Without any further ado, can I please request the Honorable Prime Minister to propose the case?
I want you to keep this image very closely in your head throughout my speech. I want you to imagine a 2-year-old toddler being trampled over and being rolled over 9 times by a car and a group of people standing by doing nothing. And then I want you to imagine this is just a far extreme of many cases in which we see people doing by and actually letting crimes happen in our society. I want you to imagine as well, this is just a small fraction of what actually happens in the day-to-day lives of people. It can be as simple as a sketch have gone wrong. It can be as serious as a case in China with a 2-year-old girl being neglected by society, being given away to the hands of crime. And this is precisely the lacuna in the law that we see that's prevalent in our society today. The problem is, very clearly, there were very clear commissions of committing of crimes is gone to waste because the system of law currently sees it as a form of omission, and we can't touch people who actively decide not to do anything. It is regrettable that we have to use such a harsh measure in order to change this, and we think it's important. But let's get to a few parameter issues. Now, the constant problem with the law that we see currently is that we're unable to distinguish who should not be culpable for various crimes, especially with regards to bystanders. The problem with this is that it's simply a facade, and today we hope to break this facade. The first thing we need to understand is that it's really easy to really calculate how do you quantify reasonable assistance to be. And this is there's simply 2 thresholds. The first of which is one of proximity. And we think proximity has 2 further simple criteria. The first of which is relational. And we think relational simply means if you're in a near context or near relation to a person such as a family member or a brother or a cousin, we think you are in direct, close relation to indeed do something to help them. The next criterion is basically causal proximity. You must imagine in the circumstances where you're basically near enough to change the causality of something, you should be compelled to do so. The second area of threshold, second very clear threshold, is practicability. Practicability simply means, first of all, you're able to basically, in the basic sense, are enabled to reasonable standards achieve the ends of helping the person that you need to help at the end of the day. So we won't force people who don't know how to swim to jump into the river to save the drowning child. We won't force someone to run into a burning building at the risk of their lives, because that's just not how the law works. So we don't want to endanger another life in the process of trying to save another. More than that, we also think that there's a critical mass and critical number between when it comes to practicability. In other words, if you see a child drowning in a 1-meter pool, you wouldn't urge 10 people to go in and try to save the child. It is pretty obvious that if one person tries to save him, the person is the critical mass has been achieved. So we think to begin with, it's pretty clear that what the thresholds of peaceful assistance can be considered in this case. And this is precisely why we need to move on to consider deeper issues today. We need to first consider how these victims or how these bystanders are actually morally culpable to the acts and the crimes that are being committed. Second, we need to really address the main principles of law that seek to redress and restitute, to give justice to victims at the end of the day. But most importantly, I'm also going to tell you why our system of policy actually works, to conclusively tell you why we need to pass this motion. But first of all, the moral culpability. Now, the very simple thing that needs to be changed here is the idea of perception, that your choice to do nothing is okay. That your choice to do nothing is not really culpable to abilities or culpable to a crime that was committed. No, thank you. The first and most important thing that we need to understand is that the prevalence of laws that support each other, making sure that the concept of law is always to prevent harm. And this is very prevalent. We see simple examples of how obstructions of justice are considered criminal in nature. Lying in court is considered criminal in nature. Other things is just the whole boundaries, the whole concept of divisions in law is related very fundamentally to this. Most importantly, what is important to draw here is why standing by doing nothing is very, very similar, if not entirely the same, as all of this above. And the relationship here is simply that you enable and allow a crime that would not have been committed to be committed. So the lines of causality, we need to ask ourselves two further questions. The first of which is, would this event have happened if it wasn't for your action? And in this case, it's because you're standing by, doing nothing. It does. We think under the current consistencies and causality in law, we have to find you more culpable. Even if this threshold is not one that you must consider, you must also consider how your inaction contributed to this crime or this crime happening in the first place. Again, it's very simple. If you see a person being knocked down by a car recklessly and you don't call the police, and this person doesn't get to the hospital in time, his life is lost, we think you definitely materially contributed to this person's injury, and therefore you are very much in the link with causality in creating this harm. And therefore, the end result can only be this. When we consider the end results of what we consider to be a baseline, I think in a moment of negligence, the ideas of how your abilities should not harm, I think in a moment, third parties in general, we think that your ability to choose nothing is a choice to begin with, and your choice is led to direct harm as a result of your inaction. Go ahead.
Sir, if you want to criminalize someone, you must prove that that person has criminal intention to do harm on that person.
This is not true, right? The end result in many instances, right. First of all, the intention here is extremely nuanced, right? The intention here is to commit and continue the harm that was being caused, whether or not you're in active consideration of this to begin with. And this is sometimes the end results of law because we have to enable justice at the end of the day. By the way, I forgot to clarify to begin with that obviously the boundaries to this has to be that very simply when you approach criminalization of this, there also is a response of mitigation defenses as continued with systems of courts, which means to say that if you did your best, you are very much liable to exclusion for liability once you actually enable yourself to try and do something. So moving on, right, so why we need to achieve justice to victims. So this is a very common reason, a common end result to any system of remedies that we consider within the system of law. Really the end result of any courts of laws is always to give restitution to the victims at hand. The problem with the law right now is that in these cases of bystanders, where we cannot attribute blame to the poor victim who has indeed suffered, this person, his family, cannot achieve one, closure, because he doesn't know exactly whether or not this person was drowned without any help, whether he was doomed to die or not. We cannot stress that while we will trivialize this, the people of these families do not. And it's extremely painful for these families, it's extremely important that we enable this law. More than that, ladies and gentlemen, it's important to give the ability to claim some kind of financial remedy to enable these families to go about their lives the way they should have. Again, consistent with the system of law, it tries to bring back these victims as close to the position where they were had the crime not been committed. And last of all, why will it work? And it's simple with the answer here is simply this. And the passing and changing of laws is very important in Indians, and we understand that regrettably is the harsh system of law. We think first of all it's reasonable, right? Because it's reasonable within the bounds, the line that is fine. We don't think people are going to be compelled to do more than they should be, because we know at the end of the day, certain amounts of things, you will be excluded for liability as well as try. More than that is that it changes the mindset and the cost-benefit calculus of people within society to move away and destroy the system of apathy that's conducted towards people, and where people can actively go on their daily lives thinking that if I have a personal right of choice, and my right to choice is extended to my neighbor, it is important therefore to respect this motion, respect the poor victims who do not have any kind of recourse. This motion must stand.
Recognizes the first speaker from the opening government. Can I please request for the first speaker from opening opposition?
Mr. Speaker, members of this August House, we always clap and appreciate when someone helps someone who is in need. So that's why we have so many comic characters like Superman, Spider-Man, and we praise them because out of their own will they help other people. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, in terms of protecting victims or in terms of protecting people, we believe that that's the responsibility of the government. And we believe that that's why we came into the society under social contract and we hand over all this responsibility to the government. But we still also praise that women value that human practice in terms of helping each other. So that's why we believe that it should be out of individual choice whether I should help someone or not. So this sort of value should not be imposed on anyone in this society. Now, Mr. Speaker, before I analyze that why that we should not criminalize a person who is the witness of a crime, there are a couple of issues need to be discussed. First issue need to be discussed is that idea of the criminal behavior. When you want to criminalize someone, you must prove that that particular person has some criminal behavior or has some intention to harm a particular person. We believe that in this case, witness never have any sort of intention to harm someone. They are just the witness of any incident. They didn't intend to harm that person. They also didn't plan to do any sort of harm to that person. So actually, Mr. Speaker, we believe that when you criminalize someone, you must prove that that person has intention. We believe that this side of the government did not prove any sort of intention that coming from the witness and which incurred so much damage to the victim. Sit down. Now, Mr. Speaker, in my analysis, I'll also directly clash with what they have said. Mr. Speaker, first thing that I'll talk about that act of omission and why we should not criminalize people for act of omission. Mr. Speaker, we have to really understand that when we criminalize someone based on your duty and responsibility. Sometimes we criminalize parents for being negligent to their children. But in this case, like if you see that your family members being attacked by a robber, obviously you help because out of your love and passion. But in the other case, if I see someone who I don't know, Mr. Speaker, you cannot impose any sort of responsibility on someone that I don't know. So that's why I don't have any solidarity or I don't have any responsibility to someone or I don't have any duty on someone I don't know. Since I don't have any responsibility on someone I don't know, so that's why you cannot criminalize or criminalize not fulfilling my responsibility because I don't have responsibility to begin with to someone that I don't know. Yes.
So, in the case of drug use, we want to do nothing but make a buck out of transporting drugs across the border. They don't hold any responsibility, they don't hold any intention to harm the people that these drugs try to hurt, yet we give them the death penalty as a criminal court sentence. Why is this allowed under your explanation?
Mr. Speaker, that's really absurd parallel example draw that drug trafficking with the I witness someone doing something. Because drug trafficking, they intentionally bring a dangerous substantial within the society and they know that if someone take it, that person that will inflict a dangerous harm to that person. But in this case, it just, for witnessing a crime, it doesn't apply same way. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that when you remove this act of omission, or when you criminalize someone for act of omission, then what you are doing? The harm is that you are taking away individuals' freedom because you are imposing extra burden or duty on individuals who don't have any sort of responsibility to anyone else. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, we really have to understand that you are taking away individuals' freedom. You are making every individual police of the state. That means you are putting extra burden on them. Now also, Mr. Speaker, we have to analyze that. We have to understand that the risk factor analysis. Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that like someone else being attacked by a mafia leader. Then why should I take risk of my own life to help someone? Because police is there and also the authority is there to help that person. And even if I cannot do something, that later police will investigate and also the punishment will be there. Also deterrence exists based on the law. So that's why you cannot force me to risk my own life to help someone else who I don't want to help. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, you are putting also that witness into a danger. Now, Mr. Speaker, analyzing my second idea, which is called the social contract theory. Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that if government shift this social contract to individuals, then what will happen? That, Mr. Speaker, there are so many harm will create. First thing is that it will create a fake sense of security because now police will be less surveillant. Police will think that if someone doesn't help that person will automatically will be criminalized. So that means I don't have to do anything. So people are already in a pressure to help someone else. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, we give a consent and to form a government or to form a society. Now government cannot tell that, oh, it's your own right to protect other individuals. Then what's the point of I form a government? What's the point of I'm respecting the law when you want me to take the law in my own hand? So that's why, Mr. Speaker, you are really violating the social contract theory, and which government shouldn't do so. And also, if government, even if it takes place, it creates false sense of security because police will be less surveillance. And Mr. Speaker, my second speaker will come and talk about the idea of human value. And if you impose this kind of human value on someone, it takes away the human value because we appreciate human value based on your own will, and that sort of humanity shouldn't be exist within the society to appreciate, to distinguish what is human and what is non-human. So that's why, Mr. Speaker, I analyze that why act of omission should be exist because otherwise it takes away humans' freedom. I also talked about that government should maintain its social contract theory, and it's the government role to fulfill those kinds of security and also bring justice into the society to create deterrence. So that's why this kind of burden should not be imposed on civilians.
So recognized as the first speaker from opening opposition, can I please request for the second speaker from opening government?
We need to prevent and punish cases like when 2-year-old Yue Yue lost her life because 19 passerbys refused to do anything, although they were aware and in proximity of being able to help her. We cannot allow them to trivialize this particular case, and we say that as a state, we have the prerogative to prevent these things and guide the moral compass of the state, which will be my substantive later on. But before that, let me talk about the biggest issue in today's debate so far, right? The idea of justification. Right, under this, I have 4 points, which I'll clash directly with the case coming out from opening opposition. So under this, I have 4 points. Number 1, the balance between choice and third-party harm. Where do we draw the line? Secondly, the notion of culpability. Is the person in proximity at fault? Third, the notion of justice, which was never touched by the first speaker of the opposition. And lastly, the notion of responsibility, which is their case about the state's responsibility. So let's talk about harm versus choice, because what they said was very simple, right? The concept that there is a social contract and the state has responsibility to make sure to protect your choice. But we argue that this choice is not absolute. It is limited by your ability to make sure that you prevent harm to others. And the moment your action or inaction causes harm to a third-party individual, we say that the state is justified in preventing you and punishing you for doing that particular act. So we say in this case, your choice to get coffee or your choice to get to work on time causes a 2-year-old toddler to be hit by a car 19 times. We say then your choice is limited to make sure that you help the little girl. We say that your inconvenience is not good enough the reason to justify your freedom of choice. We say that the social contract here doesn't apply that much. Moreover, we say that your choice is not even life-threatening. So we say that in cases where your life is threatened, we don't expect you to give up your life to help her, but we say that when in cases where it doesn't hurt you to make a bloody phone call, you make sure you do. Otherwise, you are criminally liable. So when it comes to the balance between harm and choice, we say we clearly fix the case because we have drawn the line here to say, to say that if you have crossed that line, you can help, but you don't, you're supposed to be punished. Second, let's talk about culpability, because he says that in order for you to be criminally culpable, there needs to be criminal intent. No members of this house, because the law is about accountability, it's about determining who has done what and whether that is wrong. It's not just whether you have the motive to do so that we punish you, but we say that it is about also the idea of the fact that you need to be accountable, which is why we punish manslaughter, even though it might that might not be on purpose. That's why we have laws against negligence, although because your choice of self-interest has harmed another individual. Because the line here they will draw is because you know that your inaction is causing that thing to happen. You see the toddler going to hit, and you say, you know what? I'm not going to go there to inconvenience me. I need to get my coffee. That knowledge, members of this house, is saying that is what we need to punish, because the criminal intent here is your choice to let it happen. Moreover, Brian has established to you that in fact you are in causal proximity, you are in a reasonable distance to help. We say there's no reason why you shouldn't. Then let's go on to talk about the notion of justice, right? I'll take closing in a moment. We say that when it comes to the closure for families, this is very, very important, because for the mother of Yue Yue, she has no idea why her daughter has lost her life. She cannot reconcile why this has happened. We say that this is a fundamental tenet of justice that we need to understand, because every time we punish a criminal, it is to help the families achieve closure. They did not deal with this point, and we say it's particularly important for the state to say that these individuals could help but didn't, and they need to answer to the families of Yue Yue. No, thank you. Yes.
So, do you support and legalize any extent of vigilantism?
No, we do not think so, right? Because ultimately, we say that you are not in proximity and you're not at fault, right? We say that when it comes to this, we're talking about inaction, where you are in a position to help. And we say, ladies and gentlemen, that's completely out of the picture. Let me go on to the last part, the notion of responsibility dealing with that case, right? So firstly, the notion of state responsibility. They say that, well, it's the state's problem, right? We shouldn't allow them to do so. But we say that ultimately, the state has a limited reach. And when you are in a position to immediately help that boy, you cannot expect the policeman to take a 20-minute a car ride to help the boy who's drowning in the river when you can bloody hell pull that little boy out of the water. So we say, members of this house, the state has a responsibility, yes, but you also have a standard of culpability as well. Then he says that, well, this is not our problem, right? This is another individual, it's not even my family member. But we say you do, because ultimately the social contract that you talk about applies here. You also have a reasonable expectation that others will help you if you're in a similar circumstance. So we say there's a informal social contract here between you and others in society, and we say the state is justified here to enforce that. And we say that even if it is not their problem in their paradigm, we want to make it the problem of people, because we believe that it's a good, inherent good for people to help. Which brings me nicely on to my substantive about the whole idea of the state's prerogative to the people's moral compass. And we say that in this case, the law has always been the state's apparatus to guide progressive laws, to guide the morality of the state, right? We say that, which is why we allow within the law there's the legalization of marriage, the allowing of abortion, because we want to define within society what is morally acceptable and what is not. And we say that generally laws are progressive in nature, right? We want to seek to define what society should understand and what society to advocate in their moral compass. And we say that given there's a prevailing sentiment in place in many countries that, you know what, we need to defeat the idea within society, the context and the mindset that we should mind our own business, we should let our self-interest be key. We say the state needs to step in here and say, you know what, that's not good enough, we need to change the people's mindset. And we say by having this particular policy, it will work, because elaborating on what Brian has already talked about, it will change their calculus and make them not just think about themselves, because now we reprioritize an individual calculus, right? Because right now when they see a situation happening, they will not think about, hey, will I be hurt in this case? Will I have a problem if whether I should get my coffee? We say in this case here, they are compelled to help because they are guided by the law to say this is the right thing to do, you need to do it. So we say that this is a normative message that the state needs to send, and we say we've done so in other laws. For example, the Good Samaritan law, where we actually incentivize people to help, to say that, you know what, if you help, we'll make sure that you are a switch of all criminal liability if in case your assistance, it doesn't get the desired result. We say that in this case, the law seeks to protect and enhance people's ability to help others and to go towards fulfilling the right morals. Members of this house, if we want to make sure that cases like Yue Yue doesn't happen again, we say that our policy is justified, there is a responsibility for the state to do so. Your choice is not unlimited, and we need to make sure that no more toddlers get killed. Thank you.
This House recognizes the second speaker from opening government. Can I please request for the second speech from opening opposition? Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Before I go to my substantive, too many issues that we should be investigate. First of all, the whole argumentations about justifications of making somebody criminal when they're not actively involved or do not have the intention to do any crime. Second of all, we need to Mr. Speaker, justify the act of omissions and whether a person should be criminalized based on his actions or for the situations that he was not even involved. Because I think the opening opposition government, what they missed out is a scenario, the scenario to portray in today's debate. What kind of accidents that happen on the street. You don't know whether a person is being killed because they're gangster, and we don't want to help them. The moment you see something is going on, Mr. Speaker, the reasons why we do not want to go and help them, because we do not know the consequences, we do not know why the thing is happening. The 2 years girl that was murdered on the street, please have a seat, sir. You had your time, you wasted. Mr. Chair, what do you see when a 2 years girl has, if they were on the street, we think that there was a responsibility of the father or the parents to take care of the kid. It's not the society itself. Even if it does, Mr. Speaker, we try to portray a scenario in the third world countries. We do see that the social contract in the third world countries is really huge, and we're already taking care of each other very well. If any scenario happens where people are not helping each other, Mr. Speaker, you have to go to dig the real problems of that cause, Mr. Speaker, and which we feel that has not been justified in this debate. The whole justifications that came from the opening out is that, look, you know what, you should do something because it's morally binding. People are dying, so you gotta do something, Mr. Speaker. We also argue from our side is that how do you justify that act to be criminally charged? And what type of charge are you going to give them? Are you going to give them the murder charge because somebody got murdered and we couldn't help them out? Because the reasons why people are not willing to help, Mr. Speaker, or don't want to involve themselves in situations where the other party is getting hurt, because the complexity of this problem is huge. Because you do not know who is harming whom and what kind of problems that you're going to face if you are going to rescue the person. So because you have to understand, if you're talking about a scenario about a gangster, can you really secure the person who tried to go and rescue the man who is being insulted or being monitored or street? We feel that the government cannot give that kind of guarantee to the society who wants to rescue the victim. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, my first speaker has clearly established the concept of social contract. We do feel that it's government responsibility to secure the society from these things to be happening. Even if it does happen, Mr. Speaker, we have seen there are several campaigns going on. There, triple nines is still there, and we are promoting people to have awareness if they see any kind of scenario to call the authorities to give message or send a message that something is going on. We promote that, Mr. Speaker. We do not promote in the society that if you do not help the person who is criminally charged. We do feel that, Mr. Speaker, the moment you pass this case in today's motions, you are creating a discomfort society to begin with. Because what will be happening, I would not feel comfortable to go out because that anything can happen. I have to be criminally charged. I will cage myself at home rather than going out and being a free life. We feel that, Mr. Speaker, freedom of choice or freedom of expression or freedom of life should be given to individuals who want to practice it. You cannot necessarily, Mr. Speaker, charge a person because it do not have the third party. So we do not feel any justifications that could be taking place in today's debate. Yes.
So I want you to tell me that if you consider this side, you will let a person with your sister or you're standing next to him because of your freedom of choice.
Sister, because you already said if there is family members we have the willingness to help. If there is family members, of course we do take care, but the person who we do not know that where they come from, or should we really put ourselves in the risk to save that person? We feel that is not justified into this debate, Mr. Speaker. We also talk about the responsibility of an individuals in the society. We feel that the responsibility of the person is not to directly help, but what we promote in the society is to call the authority to help the particular victims, Mr. Speaker. We think the responsibility is relies on the particular matters, and we should not have to further push it in a way that it should be criminally just, Mr. Speaker. On the second issue, they have given an example, parallel example about drugs, and this, not helping these particular persons. We see drug itself is criminally charged because you directly know the harm that you will be charged, and yet you damage, you bring that contents of drugs to harm other party, Mr. Speaker. We see there is a direct link with that. But if you draw the same parallel with regards to somebody who is, being victim on the street, we do not see that we have any direct intention to bring that harm to the victim, Mr. Speaker. We feel that in that regards, they have not any good stance in today's debate.
So,
my speaker have already explained to you the act of omissions. They have clearly told you, Mr. Speaker, you cannot necessarily punish a person if they're not involved or do not have any active intention to do so, Mr. Speaker. They have not clearly mentioned or not even argued on the regards of why act of omissions should still be exist in today's debate. Let me allow to my first, the substantive contribution in today's debate, which is the recognition of human value. Which is more important? You create an awareness within the society, and you tell people, look, you are there to take care of each other, rather than forcing people and force them and to do something, make them military within the society. Do we really want to give them the burden to begin with, Mr. Speaker? We do feel that we do not do so, because first speaker has explained to you the Superman, the Spider-Man, this kind of concept. Why do we remember them? Why do you value them, Mr. Speaker? We value them, we recognize them because they are different. Because they have created the human value that out of their own willingness, Mr. Speaker, to help each other. We want to create that kind of relationship with each other, but not forcing them. We already told you the harms if you force a person. We feel that the moment you give them harm, Mr. Speaker, force them, criminally charge them, you're creating a discomfort society, which we do not want, because the people will not feel even themselves secure, because anything can happen, especially if you take a scenario of third world countries, Mr. Speaker. There might be some scenario when people would not might want to go out because they have to help the other parties. So we found that, Mr. Speaker, to recognize the human value, you should not just force them, but why don't you create some awareness if there is any necessity. So with that, Mr. Speaker,
Brings us to the end of the debating from the upper house. Can I please request the first speaker from closing government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the closing government, there are two things that we are primarily going to focus on. The first thing that we are going to talk about is that how there is no moral ambiguity in making this choice, and that the ambiguity that exists is only perceptional, and why this perception needs to be changed with the help of legislation. The second thing that we are going to talk about is how social values should not be formed organically from amongst people, but it should come through legislation, and how that's a better way of doing things. From the first idea of how it's not a morally ambiguous choice to make, ladies and gentlemen. When there is a 2-year-old child being run over by a vehicle, ladies and gentlemen, no one says that it may be wrong to save her or it may be right to save her. Everyone recognizes that someone should save her, or that it is an absolutely right choice to save her. It's just that people think that someone else should do it, or that people hold other people responsible. We think this is where the tragedy of commons comes into place, ladies and gentlemen. Most people think that they would never be in this position, that it's okay for them to not do this because they would never be in this position and they may not need help, ladies and gentlemen. The problem, or the inherent problem with people, is that they always subject or hold other people to a higher moral standard, ladies and gentlemen, as compared to themselves. They may think that the stronger guy in the crowd has a higher responsibility, or the police has a higher responsibility of doing it, ladies and gentlemen. We're telling you that this ambiguity needs to be removed in the form of legislation, ladies and gentlemen. We're telling you that this is as like there is as much consensus on this as there is on the idea of taxation, ladies and gentlemen, that that more rich people should pay taxes or more people should pay taxes, ladies and gentlemen, and that it should be divided amongst people. We think that there is no debate that whether this child needs help or not, or whether she should be helped or not, ladies and gentlemen. The problem is always about who should help. We think that becomes a grey area. We think law can help remove that grey area, ladies and gentlemen, and that is extremely important to understand in this debate. The second idea that we wish to talk about right today is that why social values should not come about as an organically, ladies and gentlemen, but should be shaped by legislation. Here we are arguing that when people make predictions or trends, and this is the problem that we had with opening opposition, they largely put in normative standards. They said omission is never punished, therefore omission should not be punished, ladies and gentlemen. We think societies become convenient or okay with, comfortable with certain way of functioning, ladies and gentlemen. There is no discussion, there is no deliberation as to why this is the right choice. When you allow legislations to shape these values, ladies and gentlemen, there is necessarily discussion, there is a debate, ladies and gentlemen, that helps shape priorities, that helps shape opinions and principles, ladies and gentlemen. We think it's a good idea to do it, ladies and gentlemen. Before I move in, closing.
Sir, don't you think by legislating that you need to help other people when they are in need, you're increasing moral ambiguity rather than decreasing it in any way?
No, as we clearly stated to you, that there is no moral ambiguity here that the person deserves help, ladies and gentlemen. We'll also talk about how this is a legitimate choice. We think that opening government did a good job of telling you how it will help reduce situations where harm occurs, ladies and gentlemen. We'll give you more of a principled justification as to why we should ensure that this is a legitimate choice, ladies and gentlemen. And let's borrow from their ideas of social contract, right? We're telling you that their analysis of social contract is really shallow. What we think social contract legitimately entails is, sit down, sir, is that people come together to form societies, that when people come together, the collective or the sum is greater than the individual capabilities of people, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the state has a lower role or a lesser role in a society that people have collectively come about to form, right? Because we think that state exists only to account for the inadequacies of the people, ladies and gentlemen. We think that as societies evolve, societies become better. We think the inadequacies of people become less and the role of state becomes lower, ladies and gentlemen. We think people's responsibility to each other, people's duty to each other increases, ladies and gentlemen. Because more importantly, we believe that when people have collective moral responsibilities, right, it strengthens people's belief in society, and that we think is an inherent value, ladies and gentlemen. When people trust society more, then there is less of a strife, there is more belief in the rule of law, etc., ladies and gentlemen, and people are more aligned with the destiny of the state itself, ladies and gentlemen. And how does this come about? This comes about, sit down, sir. This comes about when people see state or society as an agent that would help them in distress, ladies and gentlemen, when they are most vulnerable, when they need the state most, ladies and gentlemen. We think that when the state helps you when you need it the most, ladies and gentlemen, when the society helps you when you need it the most, it gives you that belief or faith in society, ladies and gentlemen. It tells you that doing something of common good is something that we should aspire to do, sir. This means sit down. Yeah. So we think it's overall a good idea, right? We're telling you that when most people think that they can always free ride on the help of other people, ladies and gentlemen, because when they are in trouble, maybe someone will help them. We think that states need to sanctify and legislate to this aspect, that there exists a quid pro quo, ladies and gentlemen. We think that it's an extremely good idea, ladies and gentlemen. So what are we telling you in this debate? We're telling you that in the evolution of societies, states should always aspire, the societies should always aspire to be more moral or to have a higher standard, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that this is a good way of doing it. We do not think this is an infringement of liberty of people, ladies and gentlemen. And we had a POI coming from the closing opposition when they alluded that this is something like vigilantism. We think the difference between vigilantism and this is that in case of vigilantism, there's a propensity of people to misuse the law, to disseminate higher punishment to people or to be disproportionate, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that threat exists here, ladies and gentlemen, because here the idea is very clear. You're trying to give someone help, ladies and gentlemen. There is no two ways. It's not like punishing a child for his mistakes and that everyone has a responsibility to punish, because that's a different kind of a distinction, ladies and gentlemen. We do not think we are curbing on the liberties of the people, ladies and gentlemen, because we think that the reason liberties and rights of people exist, and this is in response to their argument that people have a right to cane themselves sitting at home if they want to, ladies and gentlemen. We think rights and responsibilities and freedoms have a relevance if people can see them that as something that brings about a good for the society, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, rights are extremely important, ladies and gentlemen, or rights are very relevant. You have state specifically mentioned you have a right to speech, you have a right to do this. They don't mention things like you have a right to sit, you have a right to dance and things like that, ladies and gentlemen. Because rights have a purpose. People respect and respond to rights better when they know that this is for the collective good, ladies and gentlemen, or this right has a purpose or is to the greater good of the society. We think legislating in this extent and curbing the freedom shows or further reinforces that laws passed by states have relevance, are for the greater good of the society, ladies and gentlemen, and we think state as a whole improves, society as a whole changes for the better, and for all these reasons we are very proud to propose. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The first speaker for closing government. Can I please request for the speech from the first speaker of closing opposition?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk to you about two things. I'm going to talk to you about why the only standard for determining culpability is when you can establish direct responsibility for the state of distress that the person was in, Mr. Speaker. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about the problem when states enforce morality on their people, Mr. Speaker, what this can possibly lead to and why that's really problematic. So let's look at the line of argumentation that's come from both opening government and closing government, right? For example, the broad example where NUS2 told you that the two standards that you should use for determining whether someone is culpable for an act is A, proximity, and B, that there's a chain of causality which can be established. Mr. Speaker, we agree that the proximity to some extent can be established, but we think there's ambiguity even in this case, right? We think that if you have a toddler, you can't really determine which passers-by were responsible for to what extent that the toddler wasn't safe, right? For example, you can't determine that for a few passers-by around the toddler might have been responsible, whereas people 10 meters away who could probably see what was going on but weren't really sure of what was happening are responsible. But the link that's a lot more tenuous, Mr. Speaker, is the one on causality, right? Where they told you that inaction necessarily means that you were directly responsible for what happened. We think this creates a number of problems, right? Let's look at this with an example, Mr. Speaker. We think this is something that even closing said, right? They said that if there's no moral ambiguity about a certain act, then it's something that you should be doing, right? Mr. Speaker, you can use the same argument to justify legally enforcing charity onto people, right? That just because it might not be too much of a cost to you, let not take concern. That if it's not too much of a cost to you, then you should be giving money to poor people, right? It's not a significant reduction on your liberty, Mr. Speaker, and that's something you should be doing. But it's something, Mr. Speaker, that we don't believe is true, right? We tell you that the principle for taxation is really different, right? It's not because that you should be giving to poor people, but it's because of certain inherent advantageous conditions that you enjoy in terms of what the state gives you, Mr. Speaker, that you should be giving back, right? And then it becomes the state's duty to distribute those resources amongst people who it thinks needs them, right, Mr. Speaker? So you don't owe your duty to those poor people themselves, but to the state that you were in, Mr. Speaker, and to the institutions that provided you those resources. Mr. Speaker, now taken. We think that culpability only begins if you cause the state of distress of that particular person, Mr. Speaker, because we think that determinism is really important here. Like determining to what extent you are responsible in the chain of events is something that's really important, Mr. Speaker. For example, so we think that the man who drove the car, Mr. Speaker, and drove over the toddler should obviously be responsible for the kind of actions that happened, right, Mr. Speaker? Because if he wasn't driving the car, Mr. Speaker, that the very distress that the toddler, the state of distress that a toddler was in, would have never occurred to begin with.
So, you said that there is a problem when states enforce morality, but when state gives higher punishment for rape over theft, they are putting, because there's nothing inherent that makes rape worse than theft. It is our morality that tells us. So what's wrong with enforcing morality's law?
Okay, this is premised on the fact that you have already established criminality, right, Mr. Speaker? So that's the only case in which you can show that a certain act deserves to get more punishment because it's morally worse if you concede or if you can prove that it is a criminal act to begin with, Mr. Speaker, which is something that we don't think that they've done, right? Mr. Speaker, why is this really important, right? This concept of direct responsibility, where you can determine who was responsible for what, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at the drowning person analogy, Mr. Speaker, and it's the same kind of principle that's used even when it comes to state intervention, right? When states militarily intervene in other countries and have a moral or political obligation to engage in reconstruction and ensure that they compensate for the damages caused to those countries, right? We don't think that states otherwise have an obligation to save poor countries in distress, right? The principle is still the same, Mr. Speaker. So why is the drowning person analogy relevant, Mr. Speaker? We think that if you were responsible for the person himself being in the river and drowning, we think that's the only case in which you can determine that the whatever chain of events follow, Mr. Speaker, right from after the person is in the river, is because of your action, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that those examples of inaction they give you, even the drug example that they give you, right? We think the drug example is fairly easy to take down, right? Because when you can prove that your selling of drugs necessarily means that other people would be more prone to committing crimes, and that's a standard that you would use. No.
Explain to me why your ability to choose not to do anything is more valuable than saving the man's life.
Okay, let's understand something, Mr. Speaker. We think that it's important, and there's something that we can openly talk to you about, right? It's because it's primarily the state's obligation to be taking care of these people, Mr. Speaker. And it's really important that because it's one of the most fundamental values of the state, that is to keep providing security to its people, that this isn't devolved to people themselves, Mr. Speaker. Opening spoke to you about a number of harms that can come about. I'm going to talk to you about them as well, right? Mr. Speaker, we tell you there are a number of problems. Not taken, sir. Mr. Speaker, we tell you there are a number of problems when states start trying to enforce their morality onto their people, right? We tell you that it's really, really dangerous, Mr. Speaker. So the justification that states would use when they tell you that you should be performing a certain act, for example, like legally enforcing charity, Mr. Speaker, is because it's a morally superior, some choices are morally superior to others, and thus are ones you should be making, Mr. Speaker. We tell you that there are a number of problems with this, right? We tell you that moral justification for a particular act can be used to justify nearly anything, Mr. Speaker. For example, curbing other forms of liberty and curbing other forms of freedom are all justifications that you would use because you tell these people that what you're doing is something that's morally superior, Mr. Speaker. We also told you that it's really, really important, Mr. Speaker, and there's something that opening government try to do to some extent, Mr. Speaker. But establishing why it's really important for states not to devolve this duty to protect people, right? Because we came out and tell you, we told you that the fundamental reason why these people come together and form societies is because they believe that this collective would give them stability and security, Mr. Speaker. And we think that in this, for example, in the drowning person analogy, Mr. Speaker, this would necessarily mean that now a lifeguard knows that if the person is drowning, Mr. Speaker, he thinks that there would be possibly somebody out there to save him. And if that person does exist, Mr. Speaker, he would be held liable because he was supposed to have saved him, Mr. Speaker. We think this sort of dilutes the sense of duty that states institutions have when it comes to protecting life. Right? We think that police officers, even for that matter, will be less inclined or will feel less or will consider less of a duty, Mr. Speaker, to be saving life because they believe that there could be someone out there who would be held legally responsible for all of these things, Mr. Speaker. So we tell you, Mr. Speaker, it's really important that you can determine which actor was responsible for the state of distress, right? And that standard is necessary when you have to establish culpability, Mr. Speaker. We think the only person who should be responsible is the person who was directly responsible for causing that state of distress. We think it's really dangerous, Mr. Speaker, if you enforce morality onto your people. For all of these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
This House recognizes the speaker. The last speaker,
Would you like it if I use the mic? I prefer my phone. That is a food.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason why closing government has been most relevant in this debate is because we have looked past what normative standards are. We have looked past the way in which society has been moving today, and we have asked and we have justified that society must change. We must change how society perceives what are the right choices to be given in these situations, and we have tried to justify that. Right. So before I move on and I tell you how the contribution from closing side is comprehensive in this regard, let's deal with a few rebuttals and let's deal with opening government first of all. Right? Because what we largely heard, opening opposition largely was that that there is a shifting in blame in the way they were arguing, right? Because they constantly kept alluding to Superman, Batman, and they kept talking about how family members must be held responsible. Clearly, what they recognize is that somebody has a responsibility in this case, that there is a responsibility on some individual. That's a concession, Sid. That's a concession right there among our premise that there's somebody must be held accountable here. Their only problem is along who should be held accountable, and their only standard is in some sort of possession of some sort of superpower or along some lines of some familial bond. We think we want to go beyond that. We think all people within the idea of the social contract are inherently bonded, right? Because Prasoon came and talked to you about how the social contract envisions a state which constantly shrinks in size, where people come together and largely realize collective responsibility and they start acting as such. More than that, what that means is that we have a little bit of the state in ourselves, right? Because we came together to form the state. If we are all stakeholders of this entity, just because we came together, we did not give birth to another magical entity called the state which will suddenly take care of all of us. It's bits and pieces of all of us. This recognition of responsibility comes from the very idea of the social contract, and we feel that if not anything, that has helped our case more than anything else. Finally, the only harm that they could point out around this was that there would be some sort of discomfort in society, but they really couldn't tell us what is this discomfort. Is this a discomfort because you're not really sure what you should do, or that you'll be forced into certain situations? But the argument here is that there will be no discomfort because the state is giving you clear directions on the moral calculus of this particular choice, right? I don't understand how there can be a discomfort at all, because you know exactly what you must do here, and you have no problem in allowing that act, allowing in performing that act, which opening government talked about within the parameters on which we're debating. So we really don't feel why you should feel a discomfort. If beyond all this you feel a discomfort, we feel you're not fit to be part of society, right? If you feel that you will shirk your responsibilities because it's discomforting, that only goes to prove that your role in society is that much less. Sit down. So now let's talk about closing opposition's case and how this reflects our contribution to this, right? Because what did closing opposition talk about? They constantly kept alluding to normative standards, right? They kept drawing other examples of how law does not punish them, hence we must not punish that case. But there are certain problems to that. But the first thing that they said was that since you had no direct responsibility in the causation, you must not be held liable. But that's not really true, and this analysis goes this way. At that point, when that toddler or whoever is being subject to harm, it's because of your direct omission that harm accrues to that individual. That you have a definite part in the causation of the act. Because if he had intervened at that point, that act would never have been caused. Hence, even within that framework of analysis, that person is morally culpable. Again, the sort of arguments that we hear is that we can't know the magnitude of culpability, right? When he talks about a person 10 meters away, and he talks about a person further away. All this only proves, this does not prove that nobody is culpable. All it proves is that the magnitude of culpability is different, which again is what we're fighting for. We think the technicalities can be dealt with by the judges as such. And finally, they say that charity will become morally binding, that you don't sin, that you don't owe it to the state. Okay, go.
Sir, your whole branch is considered that a society comes together to create harmony. If so, why government has to impose law to create another harmony and trust?
Fine, I'll talk about that in the responsibility of the state. But before that, they talk about how this will be tantamount to forcing people to pay charity. But there's a difference. We agree that there's a considerable cost when you have to give to charity, and we feel generally in a general level, when there isn't cost, it is a good idea for you to contribute towards society. We think we're largely fine with that. But moreover, and this was a POI we wanted to ask, but since opening never took it, we think tax evasion in this case is a crime along the same lines, and this is a recognition of your moral responsibility as such, right? Because we don't feel you owe it to the state. Again, this largely talks about an idea that the state is a new entity that's formed, right? No, the state isn't a new entity as such. The state is only all the people around you. So your responsibility, again, when you don't pay taxes, is to all those people who will not be helped, again, who you didn't cause their distress in the first place, but who will not be helped because of your intervention as such. And finally, they say that this will result in shirking of state responsibility as such. We don't think so. We simply don't believe that just by passing this law, suddenly states are going to say we won't have police people there. We don't think that's going to happen. We think there's been a lack of analysis. So how is our contribution relevant in this debate? We talk about how morality is, how the perception of morality is in this case is perceived as an ambiguous choice only because we constantly hold others to higher moral choice. No rebuttal from this side to say why there is a lot of moral ambiguity. We kept telling how there is no moral ambiguity in this choice. Again, this is rebuttal to them in saying when state enforce morality. When state enforce morality, it's a bad thing. But in this case, there is no ambiguity about this moral choice. We all agree that we have a responsibility and that something must be done. So we really don't feel that argument sells finally. So finally, we also said, again, there was no rebuttal or engagement on this point on how social values should not be allowed, society should not be allowed to foment them organically. Here we believe that the state gives the right direction and rational deliberation that's possible in the legislative assembly, that so the society will take the right path. What we are working for is to change the path of society. That's why all those normative standards don't apply. We beg to propose.
This House recognizes the government. Can you please request for the last opinion from the opposition?
Mr. Speaker, this debate is largely about knowing who's responsible for a particular act, who should assume the particular responsibility, and whether it is good for states to go ahead and devolve this or put their kind of morality on the rest of the public, right? This is what this debate is about, and let's understand what different sides have spoken to you about in this debate. Now, when opening government comes and talks to you about how there's a sense of justice and how in all kinds of justices should take place, and they give you the idea of how manslaughter and how negligence is the reason why something of this sort should take place, we think that's completely a ridiculous idea to bring about, right? Because we tell you that, for example, when you're driving a car or when you are a doctor who's cutting open another person, you have alluded to a set of rules, like, for example, to get your particular license, the traffic laws that you're alluding to. For example, if you're a doctor, the things that you have gone through. These are the laws that you are supposed to be held to. The point is, when you're not going by these particular set of rules, we tell you that it is that is the point of negligence that you're doing, right? That is why it is different from going about your day-to-day life rather than doing anything else. When you have not gone ahead and said that it is my duty to save each and every other individual, where you're in that particular state only because you want to ensure that your own rights are not being harmed, right? So we tell you, Mr. Speaker, that there's a great difference between any kind of negligence that they talked about in injustice today versus the kind of moral obligation that they're pushing on to each and every individual citizens in countries today. We think that's greatly problematic. Then later when they came out in their second speech and they told you that it is the duty of the government to attune the moral compass of society, and when closing also spoke about this in terms of their favorite word, organic change, and how they go and talk about how state legislation should actually enforce it and it should not go by that. So we tell you our response to this is very, very simple. It is dangerous for legislators to go ahead and say this is what morality is. We think it is extremely dangerous when you sit down, when you come out and tell us that a group of people who, even though that they're elected, that they are the ones, like what they said was very, very stupid, right? When they came out and told you, if we think something is wrong, we should go ahead and create discussion by creating law. We think that is not how laws should be made. We think laws should be made once something is certain that it is wrong, right? When you come out and tell us that you're going to start creating debates by creating laws, we think that is where you're treading on very, very dangerous waters. We think it is very, very important to establish how and who is responsible for particular actions, who is responsible for what is going on before you go ahead and criminalize a particular act. We think it is extremely important for you to be able to tell us that you will be able to determine in each and every particular case what will happen, and that is why we think the whole idea of determinism is extremely important in this debate, right? Because you understand that very simply, like this law in general will. Let's understand one thing, it will not be a very, very effective law in the first place, right? No one's questioning the efficacy of this law. They didn't argue for it because they know that it is very, very difficult to say that if there is one person on the bank of a river and a person is drowning, obviously if he shirks his responsibility, no one will be able to go ahead and ensure that he saves that person, right? Because it's very, very difficult to enforce this kind of a law. So the greater idea that they try to bring about through this law, even for example the 19 people who are going ahead, it's very, very difficult unless some random person puts up a video on YouTube. That is the kind of evidence that you're trying to look at to actually make these people culpable for this particular crime. We think that none of these 19 people will ensure that the other person become a witness to other people's crimes. So the idea behind this particular move is largely symbolical. Is largely to tell you that states should tell other people what their moral duty is, and to tell you that we should go ahead and ensure that whenever you can help other people, you should before that operate.
Seatbelt laws and laws criminalizing beating the red light prevent harm even though there's no active harm yet, although there's no direct responsibility. Why is this different?
Seatbelt laws, first of all, are a paternalistic act by the government to save you, and we believe that in certain cases you can go ahead and have no seatbelt laws, and we are perfectly fine with that. But even to a certain degree, we tell you that that is extremely very limited infringement on your liberty, right? Putting on a seatbelt to an extent is extremely limited on your own thing when you are not doing anything, and it's to save your own self. It's not for anyone else. It is to save your own self. You're not doing this for anyone else. This is the reason you got into the social contract in the very first place. You're doing it for your own benefit, right? So we tell you that when you're talking about when you talking about the idea that when states start legislating morality, the problem that accrues is that individuals because individuals have a different idea of what moral obligations are in the very first place, right? For example, me helping someone to some extent might be enough for us, but another person requiring more help might be more important, right, for that particular individual. So states can't really tell us what the moral obligation or what the extent of moral obligation is in any particular way when you're talking about this. So when I asked them in a POI, would they be okay with vigilantism? It was not the idea of punishing someone else. For example, if I have the powers of Batman, if I am a supremely capable being who is very, very rich, I might deem it to myself that it is my duty to go ahead and help each and every one of those individuals who are being robbed, right? And we think this is extremely problematic because this starts creating an anarchist state. This starts creating the idea of where different where the powers of the state are devolved completely to individuals, and this is where the whole analysis of social contracts and people starting to help each other falls, right? Because people inherently form the social contract because they don't trust each other, right? Because at the end of the day, they need this particular institution. They need this particular institution, that is the government, to ensure that all these things are taken care of. For example, the government should be like a person swimming in or drowning in a river. It's the government's responsibility to put up lifeguards in terms of dangerous rivers. It is the government's responsibility to ensure that people don't go into dangerous waters, or the person who will drive over a 2-year-old girl does not get a license from the government. The government is shirking its own responsibility when it's giving these rights up and telling that the other people should take care of them. We believe that the government is directly culpable in these kind of things, and if there is no case where it should shirk its responsibility and push it onto its people, because we believe that creates not only great moral ambiguity between people, because people have different extents of where they should go ahead and help each other and how it hurts themselves in their day-to-day lives. We think it's greatly problematic when states choose to devolve this right, and it creates confusion, anarchy, and this is something that states should never ever do. We beg to oppose.
Thank you to all the speakers.
Thank you.
The result will be announced from the conference room.
Can I just take my back from that?
I was like, see, listen, I was just saying that I did some work.
एक तो है ना